What's going on, fellas? Thankfully, the holidays have wound down. I'm catching back up on work. I'm almost caught up. I have been marathoning between going to visit my family, going to visit Kirsten's family, just busy time, finally dying down a little bit. I've been grinding it out and I'm almost caught up and I'm very happy about that. So we're getting back into videos. The time of not making much videos, it worked well. I've definitely got a lot of ideas to make videos on. So today I wanted to talk about what we can learn from observing high-level performers, maybe consuming informational content geared towards various iron sports. And the other thing I want to talk about is maybe if we take that a little bit too far, what would that bias and what would that dysfunction look like? So today we're primarily going to be talking about bodybuilding, CrossFit, powerlifting, weightlifting, strongman. I think you could very easily include throwing in these categories, but we'll leave that for another day. We're going to talk about what we can learn from the people who put a lot of thought into it. Maybe there are some high-performing athletes who are where they are despite their methods, not because of it. That is a common thing, but I would say that is more of a rare exception where you have someone who is so genetically exceptional that they're going to outperform someone who's kind of close genetically, who's been putting in a lot smarter work. So we're going to look for like the informational content. We're going to draw inspiration from these athletes and how they're going to help us towards our goals. Now, what are our goals? Whether you're someone who's picked a specific discipline that you would like to get good at, one of the disciplines I've mentioned, something else, whether you are competitively minded and you want to maximize your competitive success in one of the disciplines I've mentioned, or like many of you that watch the channel, your goals are some amalgam of these various strength sports. You're like, okay, well, I want to be jacked, but I also want to have good like squat, bench, deadlift numbers, or I want to be jacked and I want to be proficient at weightlifting. Maybe you've got some calisthenics goals mixed in there. Maybe you're like, I want to just be a calisthenics guy with a respectable big old squat. That's my goal. Maybe you want to do some combination of strongman and powerlifting or strongman and weightlifting. So we have these goals that we set for ourselves. And the nice part about not being competitively locked into any one of them is we can kind of just imagine, we can ask ourselves, well, I just want to be a physical beast. What would I like? What traits do I think that person would have? That person I want to be. Well, I think they'd be in pretty good shape. I would think that they've got pretty strong legs, so they got a big squat. Whether that's a squat for 1RM or squat for repetitions. You know, I think being able to put something heavy over your head is cool. But I also want to have some of that more general strength that comes with doing like, sandbag carries. And you can build basically your own discipline. But regardless of whether we're locked into one or we have this combination of multiple, there's a lot we can learn from looking into these various things. So I want to touch on like what probably could be learned from consuming the information and drawing inspiration from a sport, and then what happens if you take that a little bit too far. The first one we're going to talk on is a mistake that I have made myself. Early on in my training career, I decided my goals were to be really strong. I wasn't really competitively minded specifically for any one sport. Did some powerlifting meets. I've done some strongman contests because I got stronger and I figured I may as well do something with it. But the goal has always been really strong. And it's not relative strength that was the goal. It was absolute strength. I wanted to pick up some really heavy weights. I wanted to bench some really heavy weights. I wanted to put some heavy things over my head. And I meant really heavy. So I identified very early on that to do these goals, I was going to need to gain a lot of muscle. I was about 150 pounds when I first started lifting. I'm about 260 nowadays. So I figured, okay, one of the biggest things that stands between me and being able to pick up these big weights that I would like to be able to pick up is purely that I'm a small person and I need to become a big person. How about I go take notes from the guys who have basically focused entirely on that task of becoming a bigger person. I'm going to go watch a lot of informational content about bodybuilding, learn about how they train to maximize hypertrophy, learn about how they eat to maximize hypertrophy, and draw a lot of inspiration from these guys, even if that's not really the training that I'm doing myself entirely. Obviously, there is a little bit of overlap in the training, but that was kind of my thought process. And that served me really, really well. I've put on a lot of size. I would attribute a lot of that to what I've learned from trying to observe who I think are like the good thinkers within a bodybuilding space, right? And but I also ended up taking that too far to where it almost became a slight dysfunction. So what could your average, let's just say strength athlete or strength athlete wannabe learn from bodybuilders? Well, the first thing is probably the diet. I'm not the first one to mention this, but eating on a structured diet to absolutely maximize our recovery is a aspect of bodybuilding that's extremely heavily emphasized, because good luck getting your bodybuilding results without being at least reasonably structured within your dietary approach. Whereas I think in other strength sports, it's more of a second afterthought, whether it be strongman, oh, just eat a lot, powerlifting, oh, just eat a lot, or just, try to eat vaguely healthy. It's not this really structured approach to maximize the recovery, maximize the adaptations we make from our training, and also maximize the amount of training that we're able to handle. So we can learn a lot about eating the structured diet and targeting a high protein intake and being really consistent with spacing 3 or 4 meals, maybe 5 meals through the day, and really having that locked in. And you can see that's been adopted by lots of very good powerlifters and strongmen nowadays. And I would say maybe the error made would be copying the exact bodybuilding diet of many successful bodybuilders, which I find to be horribly devoid of micronutrients. And I think you can get, especially with PEDs involved, very, very jacked, very lean, very big, just with the macros in a very micronutrient deficient diet. But when we're talking about maximizing our performance, making sure that we're very cognizant of our micros, making sure we're getting in a lot of potassium matters. And that's kind of the success of the vertical diet, is it's taking that framework of what we could learn from bodybuilders and then overlaying a little bit more micronutrient emphasis on top of it. Now, on the training side of things, yeah, we can learn a lot about how to train to hypertrophy relevant muscles, even for an athlete. I'm glad I'm hearing more people talking about it now, this idea that bodybuilding training is reasonably functional. It's very functional. This idea that we don't need to mirror our sport in the weight room. If we just improve our overall physicality, whether it's strength, whether it's power output, whether it's sprinting, if we just kind of holistically and well-roundedly develop all of our muscles, and then we go put those to use on the field, and that doing our weight training isn't taking up the lion's share of our training, it's just an adjunct to our sports training, we're going to perform better on our sport. And the same thing applies to strength sport. Whether it's a little bit more power-oriented, such as weightlifting, whether it's a little bit more strength-oriented, such as powerlifting and strongman, cross-sectional area matters, and the ability to effectively train for improving that cross-sectional area is something that we can draw some logic from our bodybuilding friends. Now, what would this look like if you took it a little too far? Well, obviously you could probably get a little bit too big depending on what your task is, whether you've got a weight class, whether you're doing CrossFit. There's probably a level of size that would start to hamper your endurance type goals. So that might be taken too far, but putting on a bit of muscle across our whole frame in a well-rounded way is almost always going to be beneficial. It's just, it could be taken too far. And along that lines, I would say the other examples of maybe this being taken too far is if you're focused on, bigger muscles is better, and you are pursuing weightlifting and you're not placing a good amount of time on mastering the technique of the competition movements, you're probably going to be pretty trash at it no matter how big you get. If we apply that to powerlifting, I've seen some guys that see the initial success they have from their bodybuilding background when they're transitioning to powerlifting, and they just don't give the main lifts their due respect and how much percentage-wise of training they should make up. They don't give them their due respect for how much technique matters. They're just like, I'll just do some squatting and then this big old leg workout. And while that might work for a while, we're not giving their due respect to what we're doing isn't bodybuilding anymore. What we're doing is powerlifting. And I would say for strongman, while developing really well-rounded musculature is unbelievably helpful, good luck having the training economy to get good at all of the things you need to be good at to be a good strongman. If you're also having to hit your pecs, your shoulders, your triceps, your biceps, your core, your back, your legs, your posterior chain, your calves, right? If we are truly applying ourselves to have this great physique, you're probably not going to have the training economy to practice all of the various disciplines we need to be good at for strongman, because that's a lot of the challenge, is fitting in all of these different tasks. So I would say that would be kind of like the two sides of the coin. We can learn a lot about the diet. We can learn a lot about how to effectively train to get bigger muscles. And most of us probably need bigger muscles. There's very few people that might be watching this video that aren't in a position to benefit from bigger muscles. So that's what we can learn from them. Take it too far. We're maybe a little bit micronutrient poor in the diet. And two, we're probably underappreciating technique and specific practice. Or we are allocating too much of our total time to training ultimately secondary musculature. So next one we wanted to look at maybe is what can we learn from a CrossFitter? And I would say more so than anything else, it's the ability to build a monstrous work capacity. I'm not around CrossFit as much as I am these other strength sports just based at the gyms I've trained at. So this is more so kind of what I have seen in person and what I've seen on the internet. But there's a lot we can learn about the ability to train to develop a monstrous work capacity. I think that being a decent CrossFitter is a wonderful base to take up any of these other strength sports. It's not because you're the most explosive athlete, maybe like a thrower might be or a sprinter might be. It's not because you have this massive strength base like a power lifter might. And it's not that you have this great, technical explosive base that a weightlifter might and these skills that might carry over to another sport. It's because you have this gigantic work capacity that if you then applied 100% of that to getting better at any one specific discipline, you're going to be able to progress at a much greater rate. So it creates for a good base. I've also talked about how I think strength athletes benefit greatly from having a good aerobic capacity. It lets you recover better. It's going to make you sleep better. It's going to let you focus on training to muscular failure rather than just systemic output failure because you haven't trained your energy systems very much. And it's going to let you just do more training in a week in a way that isn't overtraining. It's going to let you do more and recover from more and benefit from more. So having an aerobic base is huge. And I think the approaches to building a relevant aerobic base can largely be drawn from CrossFit. You know, the heavy use of the assault bike being one that I have heavily borrowed from. Taken too far, in practical application, usually I just see this as overtraining. When people try to apply the methodology that might be used specifically for CrossFit of 2-3 training sessions a day to another discipline that probably involves greater absolute loads, they think they tend to end up chronically overdoing it. So, we can, to a certain point, we can learn and bolster our own goals from looking to CrossFit for how to structure really effective conditioning training, but taken too far. Usually I think overtraining, maybe an under technical emphasis because we're always doing things relatively light for maximum repetitions, maybe a smaller emphasis than needs be on the technical minutia of whether it's a carry for strongman, whether it's a clean or a snatch for weightlifting, whatever it may be. To maximize the poundage on the bar, we really need to get into the weeds with this mechanical efficiency. Now, the next one I wanted to touch on is weightlifting. And I actually have been around a reasonable number of weightlifters across various gyms. And I think there's a tremendous amount, you can learn from weightlifting. First of all, I think if you took the things that a bodybuilder does well and you took the things a decent weightlifter does well, so assuming you're decent at either of these things, you combine those people, you have a monster of a strength athlete already. And then if you placed a lot more emphasis on your posterior chain, you'd be a pretty goddamn good strongman right off the bat and a pretty decent power lifter right off the bat. So I think there's a ton of things we can learn. The reason that we can learn so much from them is because of these strength sports, weightlifting is by far the most developed. It's the only one of these things that I've listed that has had government-funded programs selecting for the best of the best, paying them to do it full time, paying coaches to go through schooling specifically to maximize the results in this sport. There have been a lot more resources expended on taking weightlifting as close to its peak as it can be taken compared to these other sports. And with that, we have a lot more body of evidence of what does effective training for this discipline look like? And so what I would say is if we're just talking recreationally, you got a guy who's pretty good. What does that guy do well that we could learn from? And I think the two biggest things that I think people that I've seen coming from a weightlifting background have is a great grasp of specificity, where the bodybuilder has seen the benefits to just being bigger and generally stronger, how far that can take you, and maybe has this underappreciation for specificity. I think most people coming from a weightlifting background truly understand that the best way to get better at any given task a lot of the time is just to do it. They've got a great understanding of the need of technical excellence and how to train for technical excellence. A bodybuilder is just putting in difficult sets, and a lot of the difficulty is just how hard you're pushing yourself. Yes, there is some technical demands, but the technical demands of doing a good full range of motion dumbbell bench pale in comparison to anything in weightlifting. So there isn't the skill developed of training really high skill stuff. This idea of go for a single, sit down, think about what you're going to adjust for the next one, go again, sit down, think about it, go again, making these minor adjustments and where the weight is in your foot, like your timing. This can scale really well. If that person transitions over to powerlifting, they're going to be able to reach a pretty high level of technical proficiency because they understand what training for technical excellence looks like. They could transition to strongman. They could understand, okay, during this yoke session, I'm going to go, I'm going to think, I'm going to go, I'm going to think, and make these small adjustments. They're recording, they're seeing what's giving them the best result. So I'd say understanding of specificity can be taken away. General appreciation for athleticism and power and flexibility. If we look up to these athletes, those are things that we can draw inspiration for. How helpful being relatively mobile while also being strong is for doing things efficiently. And I would say the last thing that I see people coming from a weightlifting background, they're a bit better at understanding what periodization looks like in practical application. It doesn't have to be this needlessly complex thing as I think it can be for some other people. They're like, okay, well, this general phase away from the competition, we're focusing on general qualities. I know what that looks like. I'm going to do a little bit higher reps on my squats. I'm still doing my technical work because we don't give up on getting better at our sport completely. And then we maybe do some more generalized motions. I think a lot of the guys have a good understanding of that. Now, this could just be domestically, and I'm sure you could say, oh, well, the Chinese weightlifting team or Toshiki does plenty of bodybuilding work, right? And I'm saying that's true. But if we take the really smart high performers in any of these disciplines, they're not making these mistakes that we might be talking about. They get it. They've already maybe they didn't get the inspiration from other sports, but they already understand these things that we're looking to get from other sports, and that's why they're the highest performers. But speaking generally, most of the guys I know who maybe take that weightlifting bias too far underestimate the importance of, most of all, I would say, comes down to just muscularity, but they underestimate the bodybuilding side of it. The nutrition's hit or miss with the guys I've talked to. Who knows? I don't really know what the general culture is there, but I would say the biggest thing is underestimating the importance of that general bodybuilding training. And that's why I said if you could take the things that like a decent weightlifter and a decent bodybuilder does well and you combine them together, you get a freaky strength athlete right there. That would become my thoughts for the weightlifting, which brings us to the final two. Powerlifting is a tricky one because there's such a massive generational gap. If you go to a gym in the Midwest that's filled with older guys with a strong conjugate influence, the mistakes you might be making there are very different. And what you could learn from those guys is very different than you go to a gym where I'm from in Seattle, right? Where everybody refuses to lift without a stiff bar and kilos, and everybody does sumo, and everybody's got a big arch, and so what you can learn and what the deficiency is probably going to look pretty different. And then I think category 3 is people with a heavy bodybuilding bias. Lots of these guys on the untested side of the sport, they were doing meh at bodybuilding because they liked bodybuilding, but they also liked going heavy. Someone at their gym told them, wow, you're pretty strong. There's a contest of seeing like those exercises you're already doing to see who's the strongest. But really there's this heavy bodybuilding background. They just happen to like going heavy within a bodybuilding split. So we'll talk about those 3 really quick. If you got that conjugate influence training crew, max effort day kind of guys, I think the biggest thing we can learn from those fellas is how to bring intensity, how to spike your adrenaline when you need to. And that's a skill that I think maybe some people from a weightlifting background lack, is this ability to bring this elevated state and elevate our performance, how to push ourselves super hard. Because some of the stuff is less technical, there's this greater ability to bring in crazy adrenaline and hike up that output, because we're not going to make these minor technical mistakes that might happen if we did that in a weightlifting setting. So I think that's the takeaway. The downsides are pretty self-explanatory. There's limitations to the methodology. There's this almost culture of being against doing conditioning, even if it's to their detriment as an athlete. Like, oh, 5 reps is cardio. It's like, no, you're going to have a heart attack. Please do some cardio. I would say that's probably just not treating yourself as an athlete outside the gym is kind of an issue there. Lack of focus on nutrition outside just eating a lot would be the downsides of drawing inspiration and learning from there. I would say if we're in the high specificity crowd, it's a lot like weightlifting. We can draw this idea of, okay, cool, we know that the best way to get better at something is to get our technique really efficient, to practice it often, to do that task through varied rep ranges. Maybe a lack of emphasis on hypertrophy work. And then if you're the bodybuilding guy, you can appreciate the same things you could from the bodybuilder. And again, that guy is exactly what we talked about earlier of taking that a little bit too far. You see these things that brought you success and you assume all of your future success is going to come from the same place. Now, strongman is a very interesting one. And I really struggled to think about what I was going to say for this one because strongman's a mixed bag. There's very good athletes with very good coaches nowadays, especially in the lighter weight classes, who have a lot more cerebral approach. They're already drawing from these other strength sports as they should, because strongman is kind of, by definition, an amalgam of all of these other tasks. So they should be drawing inspiration for, okay, well, hey, there are these guys who have been paid by their government for, fucking nearly 100 years to try to put as much weight over their head as they possibly can. We also need to put as much weight over our head as we can. Maybe we should draw some inspiration from their training approaches and their techniques that they've come to across that time and all that funding, right? So it's like, yeah, people are already doing that draw inspiration thing. But at the local level, strongman has a very distinct, lingering culture of not being athletics. It's we're a bunch of big tough guys. We get together, we go hard. That's what we do. We're strongmen. We come together for our training crew on Saturdays, then we drink a bunch of beers, and that's the culture. And I actually want to touch on, I think that there's some function there. Obviously there's downsides to this, which we're going to touch on, but I do think that that's something that people could learn and draw inspiration from. Just being a tough guy that shows up to do his training. Obviously the training that you do requires a little bit more thought than has been historically put into it in terms of like local level strongman maybe. But that being said, just being a tough guy that shows up with the intention of working hard because he likes working hard with his buddies, preferably without the beer drinking at the end, just thinking of yourself as a strong man, that can go a long way. And I think that if people had that idea of, no, I like lifting heavy because that's what I do that with my friends, and that is the fun activity. I think a lot of guys who kind of get stuck in this habitual, do I train submax? I'm never doing difficult training. I'm trying to be really intelligent, and they almost end up thinking themselves into a plateau. There's some function in that mentality. Obviously, taken too far, we're going to underemphasize our technique. We're not really placing any emphasis on being an athlete and taking care of our nutrition. But those would be my general thoughts. I know this was a rambly video, but I just figured it'd be a fun thing to talk about. Let me know your guys' thoughts and what you have learned the most from. I would say that the two sports that I look to the most to draw kind of inspiration from, at least right now, would be, I've looked to bodybuilding a lot historically. I think I've taken that to the point of a bias. So recently I've been making an effort to kind of focus more in on strongman specific content and draw inspiration from watching strongman specific athletes, as well as I like watching a bit of weightlifting because I think that it's taken so much further than the other strength sports have been taken. I think it's interesting to think about how much further the other sports have to go. And that's a bit of fun. So thank you guys for watching. I appreciate you boys.